You When it comes to talking about mental health at work, most of the onus is put on the supporters so they can learn how to properly approach and respond to someone who needs help. That's obviously really important, but it's also critical that the person sharing about their mental health learns how to participate or start that conversation constructively too. People aren't mind readers and can't just predict what you need. What's in your control is this: how you approach these conversations, what you say, why you say it, and to who. You are a professional in the world of work, and as a professional, there's an expectation that you maintain learning efforts to grow and expand your skills. How you talk about mental health at work is one of those skills, and it's one that every person needs to some degree throughout their career. So if you don't know how to do this well yet, you're going to take your skill development into your own hands because no one else will do it for you. This is self-advocacy in its most basic form, to talk about something that's important to us, why it's important to us, and ask for what we need. A big piece of this will be personal accountability. We can't always rely on the companies we work for to talk about or provide training on mental health at work. If you want to tell your coworkers about your situation or express what you may need from them, you have the responsibility to learn how to do this clearly. This is a skill that will take time to develop, so be patient and persistent. So your key takeaways here are: 1, learning to constructively share about your mental health at work is an important professional development skill. And 2, you are responsible for how you develop the skill over time. Considering your audience really matters when it comes to mental health at work conversations. Just because you may want to talk about your mental health in a certain way doesn't mean that conversation will look the same each time you have it, or that what you want or need is what that person may be able to give you. Here's the headline. If you want this to be a constructive conversation, make sure you're sharing the right information with the right people. Later, we'll discuss specific preparation you can do ahead of these conversations, what to share in the moment, and relevant post-conversation follow-up. So, let's start with the scenario of sharing with a colleague. Work wife, work bestie, work husband, and nicknames galore. I'm sure many of you watching this may have a close colleague at work that you co-grumble or confide in, or that you lean on when stress levels get high. That's not a bad thing. It's good to have someone that you feel psychologically safe enough with to have those raw conversations, especially when you work together for the majority of your time during the week. When it comes to mental health at work conversations, there are a ton of scenarios where your colleague is the best person to speak to. Let's look at the ones that occur the most often. Your colleague is a good person to talk to about your mental health if you just need a good old-fashioned word vomit or to get things off your chest. If you're not feeling like yourself and want this person who knows you well to give you a pick-me-up. If you're nervous to talk to your manager about your mental health struggles and you want to talk through your approach first. If you want to let your colleague know if you're going through a tough time, to give a heads up if you seem different. If you're debating whether or not you want to go to therapy and you want to talk it through with them. Take a moment now and write down the people that come to mind when you think about sharing about your mental health with a colleague. they may end up being a valuable resource when you need it most. Now, there are plenty of times when these will be the right people to talk with, like when you need support or someone to help you sort through potential action plans. But they're not the person to speak with if you're struggling with how you perform your work, or if you're at a point where you may need accommodation or other logistical support from HR. Your colleague doesn't have decision-making power, so going to them for concerns like that would be putting them in a position where they can't help you. Going forward, if you want to talk to your colleague about your mental health, make sure to ask your colleague first if it's something they can actually help you with. Talking to your manager about your mental health can bring up a lot of different feelings. When I just said that, what did you feel? Notice your reaction and think about where it came from. Don't let those feelings stop you from having these conversations with your manager, especially if you haven't had them before. So, what are the scenarios where your manager is the best person to speak to about your mental health? First, let me say, each person has a unique supervisory relationship with their manager. There's some people who can talk to their manager about literally anything, inclusive of mental health struggles, and that's great. However, it's important from a general perspective to take a look at the most common reasons to talk to a manager about your mental health at work. So, please take this guidance and apply it to your specific relationship with your manager. Your main takeaways here will be these conversations are generally related to performance, your supervisory relationship, and if you potentially need changes to your role, workload, or time off work. Depending on your supervision relationship, your manager does need to know at a high level about what's going on with your mental health, specifically if it's impacting how you communicate with them, your team, how you perform your job, or if you're going through a rough time and potentially need a short or long-term absence from work. Most importantly, they need to know why you're telling them, what you want them to do with that information, and what you're planning to do for follow-up if needed. Telling your manager that you're struggling with your mental health without giving them context about why you're telling them or what you want them to do next may make them uncomfortable or confused. If you're going to bring this up, include a statement of intention about why you're coming to them and what you need next, especially if it's something they need to transition to HR. If you don't feel comfortable talking to your boss about your mental health, and you've determined it's because your boss doesn't care about this topic, is hypercritical, or is just avoidant, it's totally reasonable not to want to talk to them about this. Not all managers care about this topic or want to discuss it with their teams. I wish this wasn't the case, but I'd be setting you up for failure if I didn't acknowledge it. You have two options here. Talk to your manager about how you've noticed that they don't seem to want to have these conversations. People don't like to be told how they think or feel, so make it clear you're seeking to understand their perspective on the subject. They may have reasons you don't know about, and it's helpful data for you to determine whether or not you want to broach that subject with them. If your supervision relationship with your manager would break at the mere mention of mental health, then your options are say nothing and accept that, escalate to HR to get the support you need or intervene as an intermediary, or if those aren't possible and you're able to, find a new job. I know that's not a popular thing to say, but not all managers or companies are up for this conversation, and you would be doing yourself a disservice to think otherwise. Many people think it's not safe to talk to HR about mental health. First, let's not stereotype an entire industry. Second, the industry is actively changing and is more people first than it's ever been. I'm making sure of that in my work with them. I have spoken to countless HR professionals who care deeply about mental health and wish employees would come to them sooner for resources before situations worsened. These people exist. Give them a chance to show you. It's important to also remember that your HR representative is not there to be your therapist. They can give you empathy and support, but it is not their job to be a mental health professional, even though employees sometimes expect them to be, in addition to being everything to everybody. I'm conscious that your relationship with your HR department is unique to you. So please take this guidance and apply it to your specific relationship with your HR representatives. Let's take a look at the most common reasons to talk to your HR rep about your mental health. If you're going to talk to HR about your mental health, make sure to explain why you're coming to them, what you specifically need, and what you're prepared to do next. Generally speaking, talking to HR about your mental health should be about accessing company-provided mental health resources, getting medically approved accommodation about how or where you work, or if you need time off of work to address mental health struggles, or if you don't feel safe talking to your manager about your mental health. Or if it's an emergency situation and you need to check yourself into a hospital, let HR know so they're aware of your situation and you don't just disappear on them. Trust me, that happens more often than you realize, and it leaves HR folks and your manager in a panic. I know this last one can feel scary to share with HR, but they are absolutely the appropriate person to tell so they can inform your manager of what's going on and how to best support you upon your re-entry into the workplace if that's something you want. It's also not lost on me that you may work for a company where you've seen people treated differently or forcibly exited after they talked about their mental health. Yes, these companies still exist. You should have heard the people I interviewed for my book and the horror stories that they shared. Some companies are still led by liability, fear, and pushing out potential problems. Now keep in mind, this mindset may be held by HR themselves or from C-suite influence. But if you see a long history of this behavior, unfortunately, that may not change anytime soon. If that's the case, you may need to reevaluate if you can still get what you need for your mental health without talking to HR, not ideal, or if your company is the right place for you. Please understand, companies do exist that get it right. I know this because they're my clients. Your main takeaways here are 1, talk to your HR representative about your mental health if you need to be connected to resources, need to manage work logistics differently, or if you need a formal accommodation. And 2, if you don't feel safe talking to HR about your mental health, it's important that you reflect on why, because the reasons matter. You can't guarantee how conversations will go, even if you prepare. But if you're going to share about your mental health at work, you're responsible to equip yourself constructively for that entire process. So let's cover some best practices for before, during, and after the conversation. Before the conversation, once you've identified who you need to talk to, your first step here is to self-reflect. When it comes to mental health conversations at work, especially if you haven't been in a good headspace for a while, it can sometimes feel hard to know what you need, why, from who, or how to get it. Preparation and honest reflection are key here, because if you can't answer these questions, it's going to be hard to explain to others what's going on for you and for them to know how to help you. Take a moment now and consider these 5 questions. 1, am I ready to have this conversation with others at work, and why? 2, what do I specifically want to share and why? 3, what do I want to achieve from these conversations? 4, will talking to people at work about my mental health provide the kind of support that I need? And 5, what am I prepared to do after this conversation? Pause the video now to write your answers. These questions may seem basic, but trust me, going into a conversation knowing what you want out of it, especially when it comes to mental health, can make it feel far less abstract and scary. During the conversation, it's easy to get caught up in tangents, fear of what that person may think of you, or all of the conditioning about why you shouldn't be having this conversation at work. Here's what you need to focus on as you're sharing: voicing any fears about having that conversation so they have the opportunity to put you at ease. Sharing just pertinent information, more on this in the next video. Why you've chosen to share with them specifically. Ensuring they understand what you've shared and what you'd like them to do with that information ultimately. I realize this sounds transactional, but this is the concrete foundation you need. Speak clearly. Borrowing from Stephen Covey here, speak to this person in the way they would best receive the information so they can best understand it, not how you would want to hear it. This will increase the likelihood of them actually understanding you instead of being busy deciphering what they think you're trying to say. After the conversation, it's crucial that you take the lead on letting the other person know what you'd like to have happen next or what you're considering. Whether you're just letting them know you needed a quick vent session or that you're ready to pursue getting accommodations from HR, you need to let them know. You can't leave the next steps up to the person who didn't request the conversation. Be accountable for this step and how you communicate it to the other person. Here's your takeaway. While you can't plan for every conversation, as the sharer, there are particular considerations you can make in how you prepare for, participate in, and follow up on these conversations to make them actually worth having. We're going to focus on 2 things here as your main takeaways: what you don't need to share and what to avoid in your logistical approach. Let's start with the content you can leave out. Remember earlier when I said you should only focus on sharing pertinent information? Not only is this important from an outcomes perspective, but going on tangents or sharing irrelevant information takes up time and unintentionally abuses people's listening ears. I know you don't want to do that, but it's easy to unintentionally do if you're not being mindful of it. Put yourself in someone else's position. Think about the times when you hear someone rambling on and on. Did you find yourself listening to your Spotify playlist in your head or wishing the person would just arrive at the point? That's not unreasonable. When sharing, keep in mind the person you are speaking to. They don't need to hear your 30-year mental health history if you're just coming to them about some recent challenges. Afford this person the same courtesy you'd hope they would give to you. The people listening might not know how to respond, how to help, or even what to say. Let's not make it harder on them, okay? If you know that being succinct is a tall order for you, not only is this a communication efficiency skill to work on, but you can also give the person you're talking to a heads up that you may struggle with succinctly explaining what's going on and to ask for their patience and understanding. This shows that you're aware of how you're trying to share information, that you want to convey it clearly, and that you appreciate their willingness and time to be present while you do it. When it comes to the logistics of initiating these conversations, let's look at situations and times to avoid. This matters. There are a lot of factors here, but let's look at the two big ones: timing and mindset of the receiving party. Just because you're ready to talk about your mental health doesn't mean the other person is in the right headspace to hear it. While it may seem like there's never really a good time to bring this up because of how busy we all are, some times are definitely better than others. Avoid bringing up these conversations when you can obviously see that the other person may struggle to be present with you, whether it's before a deadline, first thing in the morning when they're starting their day, if they're frustrated because of something that someone else did, or they're just in a bad mood. So, what happens if you pick the right audience, know your intended outcomes, nail the timing, navigate the conversation like a pro, and you still have a misunderstanding? Let's talk about how to handle that really well next. Talking about your mental health and having someone misunderstand you doesn't feel good, especially at work. Let's look at some methods you can use to address common misunderstandings when you're sharing with someone about your mental health at work. If you're trying to explain your mental health struggles and the person is clearly not understanding what you're trying to say, try not to get frustrated. Frustration doesn't motivate a person who's trying to help you to continue trying to help you. Share that you're observing the misunderstanding and that you'll try to explain it differently. This could sound like, oh, that's not what I meant. Let me explain it in a different way and let me know if it makes sense. If you've told someone that you just need them to listen to you and they start trying to fix what you're talking about, again, try not to get frustrated. People are generally conditioned to try to fix things when others come to them with something that resembles a problem. Generally speaking, there's a benevolent intention behind it. If you notice this happening, addressing it constructively could sound something like, I appreciate that you're trying to help me, but what would be more helpful right now is if you just listen. If someone is responding to what you've shared about your mental health like a total jerk, then a more direct response is needed here. For those of you who tend to withdraw, I challenge you not to do this. It's a missed opportunity to teach that person why what they did was unhelpful or even harmful to you. For those of you who go full on raging volcano, try to control your anger before it obscures the lesson or becomes a new problem in and of itself. In this scenario, follow this formula. What they said plus how they made you feel plus why it wasn't what you needed, plus seeking to understand why they did that, plus if they are willing to get back on track with you. This could sound like, I've told you why I wanted to talk to you, and you said X. It feels like you're judging me, and I told you I was concerned about that to begin with. Can you explain why you did that? It's important to me that we're on the same page if we're going to continue this conversation. Now, I am more direct than most, so adapt this language in a way that works for you. If that person doubles down, they're telling you that they can't or won't give you what you need, and it's on you to end the conversation and explain why you're doing that as maturely as you can. Just because they're doing the wrong thing doesn't mean that you should. If you find yourself in a situation where this conversation has gone wrong with a manager and over time they start treating you differently, then you may need to escalate to HR to find out the best way to intervene. How would you respond if someone approached you saying they're concerned about your mental health? Now, keep in mind that if someone asks about your mental health, you are under no obligation to respond. That is your private medical information, and it's up to you whether or not you want to talk about it, especially if you have a diagnosed mental health condition. In many governments around the world, those disclosures are considered to be protected health information, and that information needs to be specifically handled, usually by HR. How you respond to this inquiry can look different, whether it's coming from a colleague, your manager, or HR, and your comfort level will vary here too. So here's what I would encourage you to ask yourself. 1, do I feel comfortable talking to this person about my mental health? 2, have they clearly stated why they're approaching me? And does it seem to be coming from a helpful or concerned place? 3, can my sharing with this person actually help me in some way? And 4, is now a good time to talk about this? Obviously, reflecting on these in a split second when the other party is waiting for you to answer isn't very practical, but reflecting on these questions in general will help you listen to your gut a bit better in the moment so you know whether or not you want to open up to that person to begin with. From a logistics perspective, if someone caught you at a bad time and you really just don't want to talk, but appreciate that they tried to help, make sure they know that. Don't make them regret trying to support you for just catching you at the wrong time. This acknowledgement could sound like, I appreciate you checking in. I'm not really in a good mood to talk about it right now. Could we talk about it another day? I'll let you know when I'm up for it. If you don't feel safe talking to someone about your mental health, a generic and totally acceptable response would sound like, I appreciate you asking, but that's not something I feel comfortable talking about at work. They may not like that you're drawing a boundary, but it's yours to draw. If a manager brings up your mental health to you, it doesn't always come from a place of performance or that your job is at risk. They may just be genuinely concerned and want to check in with you. If they're bringing up your mental health because they've noticed you've been acting differently and not performing your job like you usually do, they have every right to bring this up, to seek to understand what's going on and what type of support you may need. If they're coming from a place of curiosity and assistance, that's them trying to help. Breathe. We've covered a lot of ground, and I wish we could have covered even more. Now it's time for you to decide what you're going to do with what you've learned. Like I said earlier, your situation is unique to you, and how you'll apply this information will be too. Please give yourself a little grace as you think about why you want to get better at this, how you're going to do it, and understand it's going to take time to improve on this process. So let's set you up for success. So what does success look like for you? Think about the following questions. 1, why do I want to share about my mental health at work? 2, as the sharer, how can I specifically approach these conversations in a constructive way to have better outcomes? 3, how will I evaluate myself to see if I'm improving? And 4, will I hold myself accountable for asking others if they think I'm improving too? These answers will evolve over time because your abilities will be changing over time too. As I mentioned earlier, this course has been a best practices highlight reel. If you'd like a much deeper dive on how to talk about your mental health at work through reflective homework, the historical evolution of the need for this conversation, or how to support a colleague around their mental health at work, check out my book, Yes, You Can Talk About Mental Health at Work, Here's Why, and How to Do It Really Well to learn more. I know you can do this for yourself. You wouldn't have watched the course if you didn't think you could or should. I truly hope you learn something valuable in this course, and most importantly, that you feel you can do something with what you've heard. Thank you for watching. Now go practice what you've learned.